I'm going to talk about students' ability to both comprehend and write sentences. And there's a lot here, so I'm going to probably go pretty fast. But as Nicole said, I'm going to try to leave about 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. So please jot down any questions you may have. I'd also love to know who my audience is. So if you could just very quickly in the chat box, tell me what role you serve and what grade level you work with. So just take a moment. And while you're doing that, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Margie Gillis. I am a certified academic language therapist, which maybe being in Oregon, you may not know what that is, but it's akin to Orton Gillingham, trained person. I really do now spend most of my time working with teachers versus working with students, but for 25 years, I did do work with kids, specifically kids with language-based reading disabilities and including dyslexia. And it was great work, but I shifted gears in 2000 to work with teachers in gen ed classrooms. And currently I have a team of 10 people. We call ourselves mentors, and they go into classrooms in Connecticut primarily, but we also have some contracts in other districts as well. And we provide embedded professional support through coaching in teachers' classrooms, pre-K all the way up through high school. So I appreciate you putting your role and the age range that you serve. So I have gen ed teachers, I have reading specialists, instructional specialists, RTI specialists, and you run the gamut all the way from pre-K all the way up, mostly K through 12. So, all right, thank you very much for responding to the chat. Appreciate that. So Literacy How is a nonprofit organization. As I said, we empower teachers with knowledge and support through our mentors. We believe that the teacher is the key variable. So we focus on the implementation of the science of reading. Been doing this work since 2000, but Literacy How was founded in 2009 when I left Haskins Laboratories to start my own company. There are 3 objectives for today that you'll see on the screen, talking about what is syntactic knowledge, why do you need to know about syntactic knowledge for your students, and then I'm going to just introduce you to a few activities. Because I only have about an hour, I'm not going to be able to get into too much detail on those activities, but we do have a YouTube channel and you can see a lot of our content on the YouTube channel. I'm sure that many of you have seen Hollis Scarborough's rope, but it really helps set the stage whenever I talk about any of these strands. But today I'm going to talk specifically about the top of the rope, language comprehension, and even more specifically about the structures of language that have to do with the sentence, so syntax and semantics. And I like to talk a little bit about fluency because fluency is so intertwined with syntax. When we talk about fluency and we describe it, we talk about 3 aspects to it. One is being an accurate reader, so reading almost every single word exactly the way it's written. Speed or automaticity, so that's also an important component of fluency. If you're reading too slowly, it's hard to make meaning. And then prosody is how you phrase the language, the text that you're reading. So we talk about phrasing and grammatical entities. What I want you to focus on here in this infographic that comes from the National Center on Improving Literacy is that fluency is not an end in itself, but it's a critical gateway to comprehension. Why? Because if you're a fluent reader and you're not tripping over those words, you have the cognitive desk space to do the heavy lifting of reading, which is really making meaning. So we'll come back to that. You have a QR code here that will take you to our Literacy How website. And before I show you our current wheel, what you see here is when the National Reading Panel came out with its report in 2000, it identified 5 big ideas that you see listed here. We added oral language at the core because language is the basis of learning to read and write. And we teach teachers about the language structures, including syntax as one of those structures. And so fluency was initially put in the reading wheel because it was a big idea. But quite honestly, when we started working in teachers' classrooms, we saw teachers working on building not just accuracy, but sometimes over focusing on how fast the students read. And for kids who have slow processing speed, for kids who are learning English, it's not their first language, that saying to kids, hurry up, read faster, actually isn't helpful. So we replaced the fluency part of the wheel with syntax. And again, there's an interconnection. And as I said, I'll keep coming back to that. Some of you may have seen the Ladder of Reading and Writing. This comes from Nancy Young, who's actually out in British Columbia, so not too far from where you all are. And I like this ladder because it really does depict that there are at least four, for sake of today, we're going to talk about 4 bands of readers that come to us, in some cases well prepared if they're at the top of this band, right? This top band where they basically learn to read very effortlessly, all the way to the bottom band where they really need very explicit systematic instruction in what we call structured literacy, because they're going to learn about the language basis of reading and writing. So I like this, this infographic that depicts those 4 bands, and that we really, the message for me is that we have to differentiate based on where the students are. Now, I'm not going to talk in depth about structured literacy today. I'm going to take one piece of that you see in blue here called syntax, but I want to acknowledge that structured literacy is really the explicit systematic instruction that we know many students need, integrating listening, speaking, reading, and writing, and emphasizing the language structures. So you see phonology, orthography, morphology, semantics, and discourse are the other structures. But for today, we're going to talk about the structure of sentences, also known as syntax. And why are we going to do that? Well, we know that proficient comprehension is influenced by how much we understand about how sentences work, this syntactic knowledge. And this has been demonstrated over the many years that folks have been studying reading comprehension. And why is it important to teach syntax? Well, as it says here, Louise Spear-Swirling wrote a brief for IDA, International Dyslexia Association, acknowledging the fact that the higher level components of literacy, such as syntax or text comprehension, may receive little attention. So a lot of people think of structured literacy as phonics and phonemic awareness, but actually, as I said before, and as I showed you, it encompasses those other elements of language, those other components, one of which is syntax. So we really want to acknowledge that many of our students benefit from building their syntactic knowledge, that is, their ability to understand and create grammatical structures, whether it's orally or in writing. And this syntactic knowledge will actually support their comprehension of text. At the end of this handout, you're going to see some resources and references, one of which is this excellent article, which you can access, called Serious Wordplay, written by Marianne Wolf and Stephanie Godwald. Again, speaking to the exact importance that I'm going to talk about today of building our students' understanding of how sentences work. So I want to jump right in with an example of a sentence that is actually considered a simple sentence, and I'll define what I mean by that in a little bit, but it's actually quite complex. So just take a second to read this. I want you to, in the chat, just put a phrase, very simply, what is challenging about this sentence? What makes this sentence complex? What would be difficult for some students to comprehend in terms of this sentence, whether they're listening to this book or they're reading this book? So if any of you, so there's a lot of descriptive details. Exactly. The use of commas and pronouns can be very confusing. Exactly. What are the people? Who are the people named in the sentence, right? Who are Rosa and Fannie Lou and Emmett, right? You have to have background knowledge. There are dependent clauses. Excellent. So somebody in my audience, Ashley, knows about dependent and independent clauses, and Kim acknowledges that vocabulary is challenging in here. Even the use of the word seared, as Kelly mentioned. So yes, these are all, thank you, you all spot on with what you mentioned here. Very, very important. And so this is something I want us to consider today as I go through this presentation about sentences and how we want to unpack those sentences so kids can understand them. So today I'm going to talk about 4 big ideas, and each one in turn, starting with this one, that oral language provides the foundation of learning to read and write. And we put oral language at the core. The National Reading Panel didn't specifically mention oral language, but we acknowledge in the work that we do with teachers that they have to understand oral language, because children come to written language with their syntactic knowledge in their oral language. There are tasks that help them develop their ability to produce and understand a variety of sentences. So I hope teachers in this symposium get the message really loud and clearly that you as teachers, whether you're teaching in kindergarten classrooms, 6th grade classroom, 12th grade classrooms, you want to engage your kids in oral language, that whatever they rehearse at the oral level is going to support their ability to comprehend, but specifically in this case, write these sentences that we want to see in their writing. So I'm going to show you a sentence, and I want you to just say the sentence. You're all on mute, so just say the sentence out loud as I show you the parts of the sentence. So I hope you're all reading the sentence. So I'm going to ask you this question. Is this sentence a subject, verb, object sentence, or is it an object, verb, subject sentence? And some of you may know, and you can put that in the chat. Who knows the answer to that question? SVO, subject, verb, object, or object, verb, subject? So an object would have the subject of the sentence, the object would come first. So it would say, my interest, if it was OVS, it would say, my interest was captured by an amazingly beautiful sunset. A lot of times when we use object, verb, subject construction in sentences, we're using passive voice like I just demonstrated. So this has an active voice. The sunset captured my interest. And in the next clause, I is the subject, took is the predicate or verb, photos is the object. So in both clauses, we're using subject, verb, object, which is in general easier for kids. Is this a compound or a complex sentence? Can anybody tell me what you think it is? Anybody want to put that in the chat? Compound, compound. Exactly. It is indeed a compound sentence because it has 2 independent clauses joined by a coordinating conjunction, a fanboy. So excellent. Thank you for responding. I just want to define a couple other terms before we go into the meat of the matter. And one of those important terms is what we call syntactic awareness. Many of you talk about and know, especially if you teach K1, 2, about phonemic awareness as a metalinguistic skill. Well, actually, syntactic awareness is another metalinguistic skill, meaning I have to consciously think about the words in a sentence and how they're arranged. And this metalinguistic awareness helps me to be more cognizant and mindful of how those sentences work, and it will help me comprehend and write sentences. It also helps me understand that order matters, and I'll come back to that, but here's an example. I have the same 5 words, right, in this sentence as the second sentence, but you can read both sentences and everyone would respond. If I said, do they mean the same thing? You would all say no, that moving only around changes the meaning of the sentence. And that's what sentences are all about, is word order. Take a look at this. This was part of a research study that was done. If you read this sentence, the child read this sentence and the teacher asked, what do you know about Carson now? What do you know about Rachel Carson? And one student said they grew up together in the same place. The student was obviously confused because we had this relative clause describing Rachel Carson as a scientist, a writer, and ecologist, but the student was confused that there was more than one person here. So this came from an article that was written in the IDA Perspectives a number of years ago by Cheryl Scott and Balthazar. And you can Google that article. It's actually quite interesting, talking about the study. So I want to talk about syntax as a bridge between word reading fluency and text comprehension. For years, we had fluency as the bridge. And when we took fluency out of the reading wheel, replaced it with syntax because we really believe that that is a key ingredient to getting kids from reading fluently, accurately, and automatically to comprehending, especially complex text. So in order to unpack that concept a little bit more, my second big idea is to describe what we've always called parts of speech, but what we're going to tell kids are the grammatical elements or the building blocks of sentences. They're a finite number. There's actually 8 of them. And we're going to teach a function-based approach to syntax and grammar so that students learn right from kindergarten on that each building block, each part of speech has a specific meaning-based function versus what most of us did when we were in grade school. We learned grammar, but it was a rote memorization. We'd circle the nouns, we'd underline the verbs, we'd look for the adjectives, but we really didn't think about the role that they played. At least I didn't. And a lot of teachers share that that is the case. So here are, and when just thinking about grammar is to syntax what letters are to words, right? We can arrange letters in different order. Some violate word order, right? But in general, we know which letters can follow which other letters, and we can construct, English has at least 500,000 words, right? So tons of words. We can do the same thing with these grammatical building blocks. We can arrange them in a different order and come up with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of different sentences. So here are our building blocks. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through. I would if I had more time, but you can see each word in the sentence is a different grammatical building block. What I will point out to you is that the is actually considered an adjective, although it does also have the name determiner or article, but we would consider that an adjective. And so I'm going to go through each of these grammatical building blocks in turn. You can just see that the 3 in pink or fuchsia are associated with each other. The 2 in blue are connected. And these 3 in green, sorry. There's actually prepositions, conjunctions, and pronouns could be part of this group too, and you'll see why in a minute. And then interjections kind of stand alone. So if I ask a kindergarten or first grade child, what is a sentence? And I did this not too long ago because I have now, I'm not in classrooms as much as I'd like, but I have a first grade granddaughter. And I did ask her, what is a sentence? And she answered it the way a lot of children do. And that is, it's a capital, it has a capital letter and a punctuation mark. And I always acknowledge when kids respond with that answer, yes, you're right. It does have to have a capital letter and a period, but we could say the great big brown bear, put a capital at the beginning, period at the end, and that does not mean that it is a sentence, right? That's oftentimes what kids do. If you say, oh, you didn't write a complete sentence, then they just make sure that they have that punctuation mark at the end and the capital letter at the beginning. So we want to teach the function of a sentence. What does it do? It actually basically tells us a complete thought, and it has to have a namer doing something, a namer and an action. So you have a very simple sentence here. The dog is your namer or your noun. What did the dog do? It sat. so that when children read, the kids, they can use their understanding about how the words function in a sentence. Who did it? The dog. What did it do? Sat. It sat, to facilitate comprehension. And we talk about that in our book. I have a video embedded here, but again, I'm going to run out of time, so I'm not going to show the video, but this is a QR code for our YouTube channel. You can quickly hold up your cameras and snap it. This video is a video of kindergarten students with Elke, one of our mentors, who helps them, kind of practice first identifying a simple sentence with a namer and an action, what she calls a who and a do, and the kids get a kick out of that, a who and a do, and then expanding that. It's a cute video, so when you have a chance, you'll see our playlist for the videos associated with syntax. So ultimately, we want to build our students' knowledge and understanding about basic sentence structure. So we have simple sentences that can just have a subject and a predicate, the city dog sat, or they could have an object, city dog taught country frog. So we have the who, we have the did what, and the to whom or what, and we could take the sentence, city dog taught country frog. So we have city dog as the who, taught did what, to whom or what, country frog. If we turn those trade places, right, where the country frog is now the subject, the who, and city dog is what does city frog taught who or what city dog, it changes the meaning of the sentence. So what is a subject? It's the who. We identify the subject by asking who or what. So who tossed, what ticks. The predicate is what the subject is doing. It's always a verb. And we ask the question, what is the namer or the who or the subject doing? So what barked, who biked? And then we have the object that answers the question, what did they do it to? So Sam kicked what? The ball. What did the dog barked ferociously at what? The cars. So again, I'm going to go really quickly through our 8 grammatical building blocks, just describing how we teach this content to students. And by the way, I know a lot of you work with kids K-12. Some of you are working primarily with 6th through 8th graders. And what I would say to you is, though, even though we might assume kids know this, the sad thing is that most of them do not. Like they have a vague understanding of parts of speech and how they work in sentences, but by and large, many of our students did not get explicit instruction in this. We started right in K, and we explain that nouns name people, places, things, or ideas, right? And what is its function, therefore? It names. So when kids say a noun is a person, place, or thing, I always want to make sure that they insert that very important word, because it tells us what it does. It names something. And when we want to cue the student to make sure when they either speak or write a sentence to, if they left out the noun, the subject of the sentence, and write, barked ferociously at the passing cars, we can ask who barked ferociously, and then they can insert the missing subject. So we have examples of nouns here, person, place, or a thing. And once kids understand namers or nouns, we then go to verbs. Verbs are a little bit easier because they're something that you can picture for the most part, right? They tell what namers do, but most kids know that they are action words, and that's their function, right? It tells action and it answers the question, did what, right? So I have this picture of city dog and country frog. And if I say what did city dog do? It jumped, right? But the problem with verbs, the challenge with verbs, is that they're not always action words. They can also link ideas, right? So then they're going to answer the question, is what? So we have city dog is the frog's new friend. So city dog is what? It's the friend. It's a friend, right? So no action there, and that can be challenging. For little kids, we start with verbs as action words because it's, again, it's easier for them. They can pantomime, act those words out, and understand the role they play in sentences. In the course of teaching about these grammatical building blocks, and figuring out how words are working in sentences, we want to help kids understand how word order is going to impact meaning at the phrase level. This is just a very easy example where we have blue and sky, and most people would think of blue as an adjective describing the noun sky or describing the namer sky, but we can reorder those two words, and now blue is the noun, right? And blue is the namer. It's going to talk about something that's sky blue. It's the color of blue, and sky is now an adjective. So again, this language can be very tricky. Language and our sentences. So we want to use meaning-based questions to understand the phrases. And again, we have elaborated the phrase city dog, or the sentence city dog and country frog sat, by including some words that would modify or expand upon the verb. So we ask these three questions to get kids to understand how you can build sentences and expand sentences. So when did city dog and country frog sit? Well, look at the sentence in the fall, right? And where did they sit? They sat together. Sorry, they sat on the rock. And how did they sit? They sat together. Those are all, as you wouldn't know, most of you, adverbs that expand or describe the verb sat. So they tell more about the action. And the tricky thing about teaching adverbs, and this is true for adjectives too, is a lot of people think of adverbs as ending in ly. Well, you're going to see in these examples, I do not have an adverb ending in ly. Here is a very commonly used adverb. And I also don't have single adverbs. I have in the country, right? In this prior example of city dog and country frog, they sat on the rock, right? So that's a phrase. When do they sit on the rock? In the fall. So again, we have these phrases, these prepositional phrases, and then you'll see in a second a clause that actually acts as a verb. So that's an adverbial clause. So I just want to show you here, we do have an ly adverb, but we also have, as fast as he could, we have a clause, an adverbial clause that answers the question how, and another adverbial clause that answers the question why, because he was tired. When we're teaching verbs, we definitely want to think about subject-verb agreement and tense, and this is especially important for English learners who, if they don't have a language that's heavily inflected, as English happens to be, we have to explicitly teach how S works in subject-verb agreement, and how ED and ING work as well. Now, the next grammatical building block that I'm going to talk about are adjectives, and adjectives do the same thing that adverbs do. They tell more about something. In this case, they're going to tell more about the namers or the nouns in sentences. So they, again, just like adverbs can be words or phrases, this is true for adjectives as well. Now, these words, these adjectives and phrases are going to answer the questions, how many, what kind, which one. Those are your three questions that will help kids expand the adjectives, the nouns. So how many, if we say the frog, we know it's just one. Or we could use a phrase, quite a few. That's another adjectival phrase that describes how many. What kind of games? New games. Or we could say, what kind of field? It's a wide open field. And which one? Often this question is answered with a prepositional phrase that comes after the noun, which you'll see in a minute. So what we're going to do orally with kids is get them to expand a simple sentence that has a namer and an action. So for example, my dog herds, and I want to get the students to expand. Tell me more about the namer, the dog, the namer dog. How many are there? What kind of dog? which one is herding? So I could say, how many? One. Shaggy, what kind? And which shaggy dog? It's the one with the brown and white coat. This is an adjectival prepositional phrase that is telling more about the dog. I can do the same questioning and expansion with the verb herds. So where, how, and when? Where did the shaggy dog herd? Inside the fence. How did it herd? With a back and forth motion. And when did it herd? Every afternoon. And you'll notice that in each of those three cases, I have phrases, right? I'm not answering my question with just one word. Many times adverbs are part of an adverbial phrase. I want to talk for a few minutes, because I mentioned this at the beginning, that part of fluency is reading with prosody. So this is, reading with proper intonation and expression. And I just want to show you, you'll have to go back and read this slide later because I don't have time to unpack it, but just to note that we do want to think about our students' fluency and use a rubric like this. This is the one that's used on the NAEP, the National Assessment of Education Progress, that just points to that there are different levels of prosody, from non-fluent levels where kids are reading word by word, all the way up to fluent levels where they're really making meaning. You can tell they're reading in those grammatical entities, but we want to give practice with that skill. So what we're going to do with our students is we're going to teach them how to parse. And we call this scooping. And in this case, we're going to look for those grammatical entities, right? So we can specifically look for the subject. We could look for the predicate in short sentences. We can look for those prepositional phrases because they're everywhere in our sentences, especially in our long sentences. So we're going to get kids to scoop those prepositional phrases, whether they're adjectival or adverbial. And in longer sentences, we might have them scoop an entire clause. So what does this look like? Using a sentence, this is just one sentence from City Dog, Country Frog. We have City Dog didn't stop. So we have an entire independent clause. When? On that first day, a prepositional phrase that answers when. Where? In the country, another prepositional phrase. He ran. So now we have a simple subject predicate, as far and as fast as he could, and all without a leash. So you can see now, there's no right or wrong way. Well, there's a wrong way to scoop. Yeah, you could scoop City Dog didn't stop on that first, right? Because they're not chunking or parsing the sentence in those grammatical entities. But some students would be okay to do he ran as far and as fast as he could, or he ran as far and as fast as he could, like all in one scoop and all without a leash. So in general, we use smaller scoops, shorter scoops in the initial phase of teaching about parsing sentences, and then we lengthen those scoops. Our next series of grammatical building blocks that I want to talk about now are called meaning links. And why are they called meaning links? Well, there are these parts of speech, or these grammatical building blocks, three of them, three categories that connect, or what we might call link, other words. They could link a phrase, they could link clauses together to make meaning. And these three categories include prepositions, pronouns, and conjunctions. Dutrow and Moran wrote a very good article called Rethinking Reading Comprehension that I think still stands today, about our English learners who struggle with these. And if you think about prepositions, it's hard to picture them. You can certainly picture in space on and under and over, but it's hard to picture before and after and during. So prepositions can be challenging. Pronouns, as we know, particularly for our English learners, can be challenging because they lose track of what the pronouns are referring back to. And conjunctions can also be tricky because there's so many of them. There's a select number of coordinating conjunctions, which I'll show you in a minute, but there's quite a few of our subordinating conjunctions, and some of them are commonly used in text, and kids are more familiar with those. Others are less commonly used, but they're all words that might be hard for kids to wrap their heads around the meaning of, but they're important. Dutra and Moran call these words mortar words. They're like lexical glue that connect the ideas and show relationships and make references. It's not just figuring out the sentences and how what that sentence means. And I showed you an example from the book about Martin Luther King, a very complex sentence that was actually a simple sentence, one long sentence with a whole lot of challenges associated with that you all picked up on. But so we're looking for relationships between and among the clauses and sentences, but then linking one sentence with the sentence that comes after it and after it. So these meaning links are extremely important. They create what we call cohesive ties, and these cohesive ties aid comprehension. They help the reader build cohesion by signaling how information is related within the text. I wish I had more time to talk about this, but there's references and you can read more about this because it's such a key concept. So I'm going to talk a little bit about prepositions. Prepositions signal a relationship between, between words, okay? And you'll see in this example, we have adjectival questions, what kind and which one. So this prepositional phrase is actually signaling the relationship and the word and the preposition with between the frog and which frog. It's the frog that has the big eyes, the one with the big eyes. So prepositions are really bringing together this understanding of relationship. Which frog? The one on the rock. So again, showing the relationship between the phrase and the noun or the subject of the sentence. Prepositions also are involved in answering the adverbial questions that we talked about earlier. So we can say ran, and we're connecting ran with where, right? Ran across the field. We're connecting dog, what city dog did. He taught when during the summer, another prepositional phrase. So we have during, and then how in silence. So examples of 3 prepositional phrases, and these prepositions, as I said, are sometimes hard to picture, and kids get lost in those prepositional phrases. It's particularly hard when you have the prepositional phrase at the beginning of the sentence, and that occurs fairly frequently. We want kids to be experienced with understanding how to unpack that sentence, even when it's constructed in a way that might be a little confusing. You could say, can you move that around? City dog talk country frog new games. When? During the summer? Yeah, you actually can move during the summer to the end of the sentence. And that's a good thing. Like, we put these sentences on sentence strips, and we have them cut the sentence strips up and move the cards around, or the sentence strips around on a pocket chart to show how the sentences work and how the words work together. So prepositions are the first cohesive tie meaning link. Another one is pronouns. As I referenced, they replace or refer to nouns. And we're going to use the same cueing question to understand more about the pronouns as we do with the nouns or namers. The dog sat on a rock. Who sat on the rock? Right? If we say he spotted a frog nearby, who spotted the frog nearby? And the kids would have to say, oh, it refers to the dog. The dog spotted a frog nearby. And we could do the same thing with a question about an inanimate object, right? Not a living thing, the farmhouse. And if we say it was white with many windows, what was white with many windows? So we have these who pronouns and these what pronouns. And the third category of meaning links are conjunctions. Conjunctions join words, phrases, or clauses. They come in 2 varieties. We have coordinating conjunctions, and these are 3 of 7. There's the fanboys, and we have subordinating conjunctions where we're joining unequal parts. And I'll show you an example of more of these in a moment. Eileen, I appreciate your question about Does research support students or not yet skilled readers can grab this concept? Sorry about that. And the answer is absolutely yes. So if you're working with young non-readers or older non-readers, you teach this in oral language. So you have a read aloud and you pull sentences out of the read aloud, especially be like mindful of sentences that could be tricky, but start with something simple sentence with a namer and an action word, and help the kids understand what a namer is and what it does, and what an action is and what it does, so that when they're speaking in these sentences, they can actually do this work at an oral level. And I suggest that you look at the video on the syntax playlist. You'll see a picture of it in the handout where Elke is working with a group of kindergarten students. So I appreciate you asking that question. It's extremely important that we do it at an oral level and we don't have to wait. More discussion coming about written language. Love the writing revolution and the writing rope. So it definitely aligns with both. And I'm going to go ahead because I do want to get to the end where I do talk about writing. So words need a structure to reflect our thoughts. Structures need the words to give them meaning. And so when we think about sentences, we can categorize them as simple. And here's an example. Another example. Another example. So they're not always short. But the thing about a simple sentence is it has one and only one clause. And I'll define a clause in a minute. Compound sentence has at least two independent clauses. Usually they're joined by a coordinating conjunction. And a complex has a dependent and independent clause. So what is an independent clause? It is a clause, right, that includes a subject and a predicate. It is a sentence, right? If you just have one independent clause in a sentence, it is a sentence by itself. If you have two independent clauses in a sentence, right, you have a compound sentence. You have John went to the store. You could take away but, put a period here, it's a sentence. Take away but, it was closed, that's a sentence. Those are both independent clauses. And in most cases, you have it, those independent clauses are joined by one of these 7 coordinating conjunctions. In some cases, you can put a semicolon in between the independent clauses, but you could also say Jeb is tired, but Logan is not. So you could replace the semicolon with one of these fanboys. Dependent clauses include a subordinating conjunction, and this is an example of subordinating conjunctions, but there's more than this number. So there's quite a few of them, and a lot of them, as I said earlier, are not commonly used, especially in oral language. So kids will come across these conjunctions in their reading, and they may not know what they mean. So we have to explicitly teach some of these. A dependent clause does not express a complete thought. Why? Because it has the subordinating conjunction at the beginning. If you take this away, he left the house, you do have an independent clause. The door opened, we eat lunch, but it's the presence of a subordinating conjunction that makes that a dependent clause. And we can order those clauses with the dependent clause first, separated by a comma, or if the independent clause comes first, you don't need the comma. Again, I'm looking at my watch and it's 10:17 your time. So I'm going to go through some of these slides relatively quickly so I can get to writing. The last grammatical element is an interjection. We don't see these very often, but they are in some of our texts. I do want to mention that punctuation use is part of teaching grammar. You can see the example here where you have trees, which is possessive because you have this apostrophe. In trees here, no apostrophe, it's actually a noun. So we have to get kids to pay attention to punctuation. a lot of kids just read right through those punctuation marks. So we explicitly teach the role of the comma, the period, the question mark, the exclamation mark, and we teach them in engaging ways. I wish I had more time to share one of those activities with you, but maybe another time. The third big idea that I want to talk about really, and make sure I have time, ample time to do this, is where does sentence writing come in? So Eileen, you asked about the writing revolution, the writing rope. I know Judy Hockman and Joan Sedita both have a great deal of respect for them. And they are both very, very interested in, and both of their programs explicitly teach sentence writing skills. So I think they're both excellent for supporting that work. And what we're going to do when we help kids write these sentences that they're reading about is to, again, use this function-based questioning that provides what I call a metacognitive dimension. In other words, I want kids to be thinking about what they're reading, but when they're writing, I want them to think about what the meaning of that sentence is at all times. It also helps to, again, orally expand sentences and then develop that skill at the expressive level, right? At the spoken level, because then that's going to go into their writing. So the questions that I've been talking about, who did it? What did they do? They elicit these components of a complete sentence. One of my favorite resources, and I'm sure most, if not all of you know about ReadWorks, has great passages to support kids' comprehension. And in this case, I'm going to use this for a writing activity. So this is A Butterfly's Life. It's a expository text about how butterflies come to be from chrysalis, right? From a caterpillar. And I might have kids, I could give them words and phrases from the text, and I will pull those out, put them on a pocket chart, write them on an index card or sentence strip, and I'll have the kids sort the who's and the did what's from that passage. So they would sort butterfly's life into who, did what, begins, a mother butterfly, did what, lays, etc. And so you'll notice that butterfly's life is the complete subject. It's going to take the life is the noun, the namer that's going to take the adjective along with it, a mother butterfly, a caterpillar. So we're really dividing up into subject, simple predicate. And that's a great first step. And from there, we could do this with objects. And again, all of these words and phrases came from the passage I just shared with you from ReadWorks. And why we do this, because first we want to make sure the kids know which ones are the subject, which ones are the predicate, which ones are the object, and then we can ask them to write some sentences using these words and phrases. And that's just a very simple, explicit practice to start with. Another thing that we do, you'll see using another ReadWorks passage, is we have this passage about the Pony Express. We're going to ask kids to use these questions to write a sentence summary. So they go back to this passage and we would say, who or what is this about? Right? It's about the Pony Express. What kind of Pony Express was it? What kind of method of delivering mail was it? It was a faster mail service. Which one was it? It was a mail service. What did the Pony Express do? It started. Where did it start? In the United States. When? In 1860. How did it start? Young men rode horses. Why did it start? Okay, so you can see where we're breaking down, we're showing kids these questions and the relationship between the subject and the questions we ask to expand the subject, and the predicate and the questions we ask to expand the predicate. And when they do that, they can use this as a scaffold to first orally express and then write a sentence summary using this information that you pulled out of the text. So it's a very easy thing to start with. And for some kids, they really need that very explicit instruction. Another activity that we love to do with kids is something called sentence scramble. So I don't know if you know the Molly Lou Mellon series, but here's a sentence from Molly Lou Mellon. I forget, I think Start School. And we have this sentence, and what we're going to ask the students to do is we're going to take the sentence and we're going to cut it up into words. Every word goes on an index card. We're going to arrange the index cards on a table, and we're going to ask, and you can do this in a small group, ask the kids to start by finding the verb. So what is the verb in the sentence? What is the action word in the sentence? So all of you will say it's started, right? So that's the first place to start with the sentence scramble, started. And next you're going to find the who. So who started? And you would say Mary Lou Mellon started. And then you would ask the questions, started what, right? What did Mary Lou Mellon start? And they're going to be pulling the cards down as you're asking these questions. And they're going to, basically put the sentence back together. We call it sentence anagrams or sentence scrambles. There's a couple of nice demonstrations of this on our YouTube channel. We use Jamboard to do it. You can do it in many different ways, but it's a great way for kids to figure out how these words work together. I especially like it for taking the sentences out of the text that they're reading. You can do it with narrative or expository text. One thing I will say is you want to find sentences where there's just one verb, because when you have many clauses, right? This is a simple sentence, just one independent clause. It's easier for kids to do this. As they get more practiced, they could certainly do more. But I think it's a good place to start. So sentence combining is another part of teaching syntax that I want to speak about for a couple of minutes. And for those of you who work with older students, Bruce Sadler has written books that have sentence combining activities. He wrote an article that is in your reference section at the end of this PowerPoint. And interestingly enough, sentence combining is probably the only well-researched way to teach writing that there is, believe it or not. And if you know the writing revolution, and certainly if you've read Joan Sedita's book, The Writing Rope, they talk about how you combine simple sentences to form more complex sentences. And if you have students that have any kind of language-based learning disability, this is such an effective tool that will help them write more complex sentences, but also understand the relationship between the words in an independent clause, a simple sentence, and the second part of that combined sentence. So take a look at that article. It's actually really good. The last big idea I want to touch on today, I'm so happy that I'm going to have more time for questions, so please be thinking about what questions you might have, is what we call text analysis. So I know that you as teachers, and most of you are teachers that are tuning in today, don't have a lot of prep time to do this. But when you find a text that you think is a super duper text and you really want to teach it well, you want kids to deeply comprehend that text, I urge you to do what is called cognitive preparation of that text. What does that mean? It means looking analytically at that text for what about that text may be challenging for students, and then thinking about how you're going to unpack the text. And in this case, in the case of what we're talking about today, looking specifically at sentences that might be tricky for kids. And I highlight the Rand heuristic. The Rand report was released in 2002. It's a report that came after the National Reading Panel, and it summarized all the findings to date on comprehension. And I still love this heuristic because it acknowledges the fact that there are 4 things that factor in when we have kids trying to comprehend text. The first is the reader. Like, is the reader somebody who's a fluent reader? Do they have good background knowledge? Do they know what the vocabulary means? Like, what does the reader bring to the text? The second is, what is the task at hand? What are you asking the reader to do with that task, with that text? That matters greatly too. How you're going to teach the text is going to matter with what they're expected to do. Are they going to have to write a report about the text? Are they going to have to do an oral report? Are they going to just have to answer a series of questions? Obviously, the task matters too. But really importantly, the text does matter. Not all texts are well written. So I want you to think about that, and then overarching the sociocultural context of what you're asking them to do and read. Is the text culturally and linguistically relevant to the student based on the student's cultural context? So let me just unpack text for a minute. What do I mean by the demands of the text? There's lots of things to consider. How many ideas are there? Sometimes you saw in that one sentence about Martin Luther King, there were several propositions that were being discussed in that one sentence, right? And you also notice the vocabulary in that sentence. Another factor is the organization of the text. And are there text features that support the student's ability to understand the text, including illustrations and titles and graphics? And then is it appealing in the first place? Because if kids don't find it appealing, they're probably not going to be motivated to read it. So you have to think about all these things when you're thinking about the demands of the text. And then last but not least, since we've been talking about sentences today, the length of the sentences, the complexity of the sentences, etc. So Eileen, you asked about assessing, and I'm so glad you did, because I do have this slide on assessing syntax knowledge. And I will say that there aren't a lot of good measures for simply assessing a kid's syntactic knowledge. We do have some assessments, a new one that's part of the CFOL, CFOL. I think it stands for Comprehension, Fluency, and Oral Language, published by Acadians. But that's not something you would give every kid. So I would say, in the absence of formal assessments, you should be observing your students' syntactic knowledge. And what do I mean by that? When they're speaking, when they're writing, do they demonstrate that they know how nouns, pronouns, verbs, all these parts of speech are used in sentences? Do they have syntactic awareness? Do they understand where subjects, predicates, direct and indirect objects, clauses, and phrases, how those get parsed, and how we can move those phrases and clauses around, and how it changes the meaning? Also, do they understand the various sentence structures, as I outlined earlier, the simple, the compound, and the complex? And how are they with verb tense and subject-verb agreement? Because these all contribute, obviously, to students' syntactic knowledge, but they may need some support in 1, 2, or all 3 or 4, actually, there's 4 things here, of explicit instruction to make sure that they understand syntax and how it works, so that they can understand complex sentences. And when I say complex, I mean sentences that are rich but confusing, and that they can then in turn write good sentences. So in summary, I want to just reiterate that syntactic awareness is a very important component of text comprehension, which is why we put it in the wheel, right? Comprehension is the goal of reading, and many teachers go right to the discourse level and don't think about, well, is the student getting tripped up at the sentence level? So if that's the case, we really do have to explicitly teach about that, because that explicit teaching is going to foster the syntactic knowledge that we know correlates very highly from research that's been done with text comprehension. The third bullet, teaching the function of words in sentences rather than rote memorization and having kids just randomly identify parts of speech. We know syntax not only plays a role in reading fluently and comprehending text, but certainly it plays a role in writing a variety of sentences. And then the last point that I just shared and talked a little bit about was how important it is to analyze text, looking specifically for sentence level difficulties that might occur when children are reading. And here are some references, some of the things that I mentioned in my talk. And here are some resources that you might want to look at. I think when you get the PDF, I'm pretty sure, not positive, you should be able to click on the links. This is my email, this is my website, and this is my email. So if you have any follow-up questions, I'm happy to respond and answer questions that you might have, or point you to a resource that I mentioned that you can't find. I'm happy to do that. So I have 11 minutes. That's awesome. So 11 minutes. So I would love any questions. I'm looking at your chat, and Eileen, thank you. You've been very, very busy in the chat, and I love reading your questions, especially now when I can actually do that and not be distracted by my PowerPoint. Can you distinguish between discourse level activities and syntactic level activities? So discourse level activities would be, again, looking at a passage, or sometimes at a whole, a paragraph or a whole passage that has many paragraphs, and making sure kids can cohesively tie the ideas in that passage together. So it's really stringing the sentences along. And what we do as skilled readers, creating a mental model that relies on our background knowledge, but also relies on our comprehension monitoring as we're reading. So we're creating a mental model and reading as we go along. Syntactic level activities would be some of the things I mentioned today, like really explicitly pulling sentences out of the student's text and helping kids kind of demonstrate that they know the meaning of that sentence, because you might have anticipated the student would have difficulty based on the fact that there's something about that sentence that is tricky, like you identified those things in the text that I showed you from Martin Luther King. How would balanced literacy or workshop models address this versus structured literacy? So the main difference, as I characterize it, between balanced literacy and structured literacy, is that structured literacy really has at its core an understanding of these elements of language, that teachers, when they know about those elements, they can then, number one, identify difficulties students are having. So informally looking at kids writing and saying, oh my gosh, their phonology, they're not hearing the sounds, their orthography, they're not representing the sounds with the correct grapheme, their syntax, their sentence order is out of whack. So all those elements I showed you in the slide on structured literacy are acknowledged, and in some part, as teachers know more about them, as teachers become diagnostic in assessing their students and what they need, we explicitly teach maybe not all those elements, but the ones that the kids need. Whereas balanced literacy is looking more holistically at language and not thinking about the explicit systematic development of those language skills to become proficient readers and writers. I hope that answered the question. Thank you, Nicole, for putting the link to the CFAL that I mentioned. I think it has some great components, and I'm always looking for good diagnostic assessments. As I mentioned, it is not an assessment that would be used with all students. It would be used with students that you need to dig deeper, right? You need to learn and understand what's driving their comprehension challenges. So Sherry, you asked about research into most effective ways to teach syntax when students' English variant has syntax differences. So that's a great question. And I had a slide about African American vernacular, and I took it out because I always run out of time. But there is a great article in the American Educator, and Nicole's on it. I bet she'll find it and put the link to it. But it was an article that was written maybe last year by Julie Washington and Mark Seidenberg, specifically discussing the importance of acknowledging these English variant languages, or kids that are speaking variety. Dialect in this case was talked about specifically, and what's bilingual versus bidialectical. What do those terms mean? So yes, the answer is yes, there is research and there's more being done. Julie Washington has done amazing research in this field, but there are others besides. Here's what I'm going to do, and just a few more minutes that we have, because maybe this will be helpful. Let me just get out of this and let me go to, can you still see my screen? Yes, Nicole? Because I can't, you can see it. Okay, great. So this is our YouTube channel that I mentioned. You can subscribe to it. And what you're going to see when you go here, I mentioned sentence scramble. So this is one of many. Let's go back here. So I mentioned that we have playlists. So this is the playlist for syntax. So take a look at the sentence scramble video, the word function video. These videos are also really good for explaining how we explicitly teach getting kids to orally express sentences, because some of you asked about that. How can we get this grammatical knowledge to kids who aren't reading yet? Well, we can do it through oral language experiences. But then they took this video, and our videos are they're annotated in a way, like we have little captions that explain what it is. We don't show the entire lesson, but you can get a feel for how it progresses through the small group instruction that occurs. So we take this oral expression piece and then they put it into their writing of sentences. This is the video I mentioned earlier of Elke doing a syntax focused kindergarten lesson. This is a great first grade lesson showing how the kids expanded the namers, another one expanding verbs, action words. This is a great one that shows the sentence anagrams and how those work. So, and this is one on meaning link pronouns. So there's a number. We also have, let me see if I can get to it easily. Oh, here we go. So you'll see in our playlists, we have oral language videos. So you just have to go to the full playlist: phonemic awareness, phonics, spelling, syntax. So one thing I will say is, I mentioned that we work with teachers pre-K all the way up through high school. Most of our videos are specifically with K through, I'd say, 4th, 5th grade. But, I'd love videos, and I'd love an opportunity if you have a video that you think is extra wonderful. Could be a phonics video, could be a writing video, could be any number of things with older students, middle school students. Send it my way. We'll edit it, clip it, do the captioning, because I do think that teachers really benefit from seeing what this looks like in action. And if we weren't doing a Zoom, I would have you interacting with materials, at least in part. Again, taking sentence. I love index cards. You could never have enough in your arsenal, right? And sentence strips, cutting up the sentences, getting kids to play with words and language. That's the goal. Let me see if any other questions came in. So yeah, Nicole is just asking to take a moment to share your thoughts. I never, ever, ever have extra time. It's amazing. But I'm glad I got to show you the YouTube channel, because I did have videos embedded, but I was afraid I'd run out of time.
There is a question of how to access the videos again. Is that through your website?
Yes. Yep. If you go, I gave you the QR code. It should take you right. Let me show it to you again. It should take you right to our YouTube channel. But let me go back to it. This QR code, if it works let me know if it does. If you just hold your camera up to it, it should take you to the YouTube channel. You don't have to subscribe, but we are always curating videos. So we're always trying to find good videos to add to the YouTube channel. As I say, it's so helpful for teachers to see what it looks like in action. So I'd love any videos that you want to share with me and any feedback. We have an online syntax course. We have a syntax book. So this is just a very shallow dive into syntax. But I have to say that of all the content that we worked on in the last 22 years of doing this work, the syntax has resonated very much with teachers with students of all ages, because they really know that they need to teach syntax, but they just haven't felt like they've been empowered to do that. So those, Eileen, you mentioned Writing Revolution. That's a great resource. There's some other ones that I mentioned in my resource list at the end too.